So in this third of my 4 videos, I'm going to talk about Das Traumbild, the poem written by Ludwig Heinrich Hölty, and the music I found out later on in the process was written by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. So it is something that singers are often told and often tell one another, is to begin your journey of learning music with text only. Now, I'm not going to take a position on that because, if anything, this experiment has shown me that either approach is incredibly useful, of all three. But there is a really interesting experience engaging with the text. I think what has surprised me and what has impressed itself upon me the most is the real power that language has in terms of exerting influence over us. And I think it leads us to specificity and emotional expression in a much more specific and coloured way than absolute musical context does. And perhaps this is the reason, I think there are some of us who crave specificity more than others. Now, in the case of this song, this poem, I should say, it felt like there was there's a quality of searching. The phrases, the way they're structured, the way that some verses rhyme and then others forgo that rhyme. The pacing is really dictated by the poem. For example, we have short phrases at the beginning. Wo bist du, Bild, das vor mir stand, als ich im Garten träumte, ins Haar den Rosmarin mir wand, der mein Lager keimte. Now, learning to pace that took a long time because we have basically one big long florid thing, and we're talking about the flowers that are around our bench being put in our hair and where were you as when that happened. So even though we begin with a question, wo bist du, Bild, we don't have our question mark until right at the end of that whole stanza, or the first half stanza. And so it's really important to explore those words, and having the time for that was really good, and trying to work out how it fitted with the English, also to find the flow of the words was really enjoyable. And I found that there is this poem offers real variety in pacing, and and we have kind of this first verse which is very much like reflecting on how amazing times were. But then we suddenly, nun such ich dich mit Harm erfüllt. Now I look for you, filled with pain and misery and harm and angst. And so there's a real urgency about the second stanza. And then the third stanza, dein großes blaues Augenpaar. We're then suddenly into detail, painting her or him, but, really luxuriating in the imagination and elevation of this person. So 2 really interesting things happened when I came to the Mozart. Firstly, I saw it was a strophic song, and that means in verses, and the first thing I felt glad of was that I had such a clear idea of these differences of pacing, which perhaps if I were to come music first in this case, I wouldn't have discovered as easily, because Mozart is so defined musically. You'd be looking on surface level for different words maybe to lead you, whereas this, it felt like the music played itself very naturally. Mozart stylistically is less intrusive. It's very neat, it's very tidy, there's a lot of flexibility. There are some things that obviously work, some things that obviously don't work. A point of interest though was that in Mozart's score there is a third stanza between the first 2 and the fourth. What actually I realised was the 4th. So there's a missing verse in the performance text which I've been sent. So that was interesting to go, okay, so this has often been performed with only these 3 verses, and I decided to follow my process and actually do the same. So that was a choice sort of made for me. Now, what can I say about this song before? It's just classic Mozart in that there is the ability to paint all of the colours that exist within the poem. And I think that there is, I think it's an incredibly clever strophic setting. I don't imagine that he slaved away over this, but the possibilities in performance are vast. So we have this quite... We're in E flat major, and I have to say the whole thing as a tenor reminds me of Tamino, not just because of that, but because of the voicings, and hopefully you'll see when you hear. So we have the voice given the freedom to lead, because underneath we just have... Sorry about my bad piano. So that little twiddly thing is very interesting, because for me that can take on the character of all three verses. It can take on the beauty of nature in the first verse. And the beauty of the crawlers on the wall and stuff. The second verse, it can be more urgent. And then the third verse, it can be luxuriating in her beauty. By a real pianist, of course. And I think that what that freedom in this accompaniment means is that we can really lead it. And hopefully in the performance, you'll see I took quite bold decisions, but they felt very, very natural. Mozart writes so well for the voice. There are real moments of climax, the second verse especially. You know, he knows how to write for tenor. He's not writing, you know, this is another Tamino-y thing. We have... There is strength in that every time. Physically, what it feels like, especially on Lieblingen, you get Mädchenhand, offen wie's Busenband in the deleted verse, the last word is. But all of those, there's height and there's exaltation, and again, that's a very full-bodied experience. It can take on all these different qualities. So I think that this was a very interesting one, because I learnt, you know, this is what you have. And again, this is a 5-minute performance nearly. And it's a really rather incredible thing to discover the music through the text. And I would almost say, you know, is this like, it's a song that really is finished, the composition is finished in the doing, because you could play around with ornaments, you could play around with pacing even more, you could really stretch things, you could allow the pianist to improvise in these interludes, which I imagine probably Mozart would have, maybe, who knows. And I would be really interested to explore all the possibilities that brings. So again, here's a performance. I really hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
Wo bist du, Bild, das vor mir stand, als ich im Garten träumte, ins Haar die Rosmarin mir wand, der mein Lager keimte. Bist du, Bild, das vor mir stand, mir in die Seele blickte, und eine warme Mädchenhand mir ich dich mit Harm erfüllt, bald bei des Dorfes Lindern, bald in der Stadt geliebt als Bild und kann dich nirgends finden. Nach jedem Fenster blick ich hin, wo nur ein Schleier weht, und aber meiner Lieblingin noch nirgends ausgespäht. Dein großes blaues Augenpaar, woraus ein Engel blickte, die Stirne, die so freundlich war und guten Abend nickte. Den Mond der Liebe Paradies, die kleinen Fangengrübchen, wo sich der Himmel offen wies,